Let's start with a foundational premise. When you walk into a library, you don't assume the books just wrote themselves. That would be, well, illogical. You instinctively recognize an author's hand in the structure, the language, the sheer coherence of it all. We're going to apply that exact same thinking to the universe itself. But this isn't an act of belief. Think of it as a forensic inquiry. We're searching for the author's signature in the very code of reality.
Precisely. You see, a system this complex demands an equivalent level of scrutiny. We aren't here looking for some vague, mystical feeling. No, we are analyzing the architectural blueprint. And so the central question of this entire inquiry becomes, does the design itself point logically to a designer? And that right there is the crucial distinction in our approach. For this system to hold up under forensic analysis, it must be able to solve its own puzzles. It simply can't throw up its hands and resort to it's a mystery. Any apparent contradiction we find must be resolved using the system's own internal logic.
So our first logical stress test has to be the physical world we observe. The system claims consistency with reality, but this is where it immediately faces a very common challenge leveled against Scripture: the charge of promoting an outdated cosmology, a primitive understanding of the universe's origin.
But right away, a crucial distinction must be made here. The critique is aimed squarely at a literal 24-hour-a-day interpretation, but the source text itself seems to reject that very reading. The Quranic word used is yom, which doesn't simply mean a solar day. Its semantic range is much broader. It can mean a vast, indefinite period of time, an epoch. So the system isn't describing a 6-day event, it's describing a 6-stage process of unfolding.
In fact, the text provides its own interpretive key. It gives us a cipher to unlock its own language. By stating that a divine day could be like 1,000 human years, it's explicitly telling us not to think in literal, human-centric terms. This simple statement frees the creation narrative from a primitive, fixed timeline and allows it to resonate with our modern understanding of a vast, ancient, and expanding cosmos.
Okay, this then brings us to a far more difficult challenge: the moral logic of the system. If a sovereign intellect is truly behind everything, how do we possibly explain things like natural disasters? You see, this kind of seemingly random suffering, it demands a rational explanation. A simple appeal to mystery just won't hold up.
The system's answer to this is a concept called sunan. It's best to think of these as the immutable cause and effect laws that govern the universe, like physics, like gravity. From this perspective, a disaster isn't some random, angry intervention, it's a predictable outcome. The system isn't breaking its own rules, it's consistently applying them. This shifts the conversation from divine mood to systemic consequence. And this is precisely where human responsibility, our role as trustee, enters the equation. The text draws a direct causal line between our actions, things like injustice, ecological imbalance, and the negative consequences that manifest in the world. So a catastrophe isn't just something that happens to us. It's often the logical feedback from a system that we, as the Khalifa, were entrusted to manage.
All right, so the system appears to demonstrate coherence on a cosmic scale. Now, let's narrow the inquiry from the cosmos to our own internal world. If the system is truly integrated, it must also provide a workable model for human consciousness, for the nature of the self, and even for highly contentious topics like faith healing. And here again, the specific terminology is absolutely key. The Quranic term is nafs. Now, this doesn't neatly translate to the common Western idea of a ghostly, separate soul. It is much better understood as the self, the integrated center of our consciousness, our volition, our entire personality. So think of it less like a ghost in the machine and more like the machine's central operating system.
In this self, this nafs, it isn't static. The system describes it as a dynamic entity capable of development, of moral evolution. It can be dominated by its baser instincts. It can develop a self-reproaching conscience, or it can ultimately achieve a state of tranquility and purification. You see, this isn't just a metaphysical debate, it's a practical model for psychological growth. It's as if the human psyche, the fitra, is a pre-tuned receiver, and our life's work is to clear the static to receive a coherent signal.
Now, this brings us to a potential contradiction, doesn't it? Faith healing. If the universe operates on consistent, unbreakable laws, the sunan, how can this system possibly endorse supernatural cures that appear to violate those very laws? This shifts the burden of proof back to the system.
But the system doesn't present them as contradictory. Instead, it offers a fully integrated, holistic model. Here, prayer isn't a magic wand to replace medicine. It's a tool for building psychological resilience during the treatment process. And medicine itself isn't seen as a purely secular act. It's the very process of studying and applying the divine laws, the sanan, of biology and chemistry. Therefore, seeking medical treatment becomes an act of working with the system, not attempting to bypass it.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most critical area of our inquiry, the logical integrity of this entire system. It all hinges on the integrity of its source code, the text itself. If we find verifiable evidence of human error, of contradiction, of textual corruption over time, then the entire logical structure simply collapses.
And make no mistake, that is an extraordinary claim. I mean, when critical historians analyze other ancient scriptures, they find clear fingerprints of human fallibility, different versions, edits, debates about authorship. To claim perfection is to make a falsifiable claim, and that claim must be subject to rigorous testing. There has to be a way to attempt to prove it wrong.
And this is where the system does something quite remarkable. It presents its own method for verification. This verse isn't a demand for blind faith. It's an open challenge. It's essentially saying, please scrutinize this text with every tool at your disposal. If it were from any other source, you would find it riddled with contradictions. It literally hands the skeptic the tools to attempt its own falsification.
So, the system's claim to integrity is actually built in several layers. First, it makes an explicit internal promise of its own divine preservation. This is then backed by a historically verifiable, unbroken chain of transmission, both orally through mass memorization and in writing, right from the start. It also points to its unique literary quality, its ijaz, as a kind of inimitable divine signature. And, as we just saw, it openly invites all challenges to its internal coherence.
So now we step back. We synthesize all the evidence from our inquiry, from the teleology of the cosmos to the complexities of human consciousness to the axiomatic integrity of the source text itself. And when we do, we find that the consistent coherence across all these domains seems to point toward a single rational conclusion.
The resonant patterns are consistent. The logic of an architectural blueprint helps explain the physical universe. The information theory of a signal and receiver illuminates human consciousness. It all seems to fit together, built on a logical foundation that feels as fundamental and as necessary as a geometric constant. The logical conclusion, therefore, is that the framework holds. Each component connects seamlessly to the others, forming a cohesive, non-contradictory, and internally consistent structure. Throughout our stress test, we have not identified a critical failure in its axiomatic logic.
And this leads to a profound reframing of what the word faith actually means. Based on this line of inquiry, the common notion that faith requires a suspension of reason, a leap into darkness, that idea simply does not hold up.
Exactly. In this framework, faith is not the premise, it's not the starting point of the journey. It is the destination, the final inescapable step you take after the process of logical verification is complete.
Faith, then, is presented not as an alternative to reason, but as its logical corollary. It's the quiet weight of truth that settles once the analysis is done.
And that brings our entire forensic inquiry to its most pressing and consequential question. If the architect's blueprint has been verified as coherent and sound, what then is the responsibility of the trustee, the Khalifa, who has been put in charge of the structure? The question shifts from, is the system valid, to, how are we meant to operate within it?